Hello YouTube viewers, hope you're all doing fine, and I also hope you're all learning Kubernetes from my channel, and welcome to this video. And I plan to do something in this video. um, I'm planning to do this one's going to be a very quick one. I'm planning to show you how to create namespace, what a namespace is, and switching between the namespaces. If you keep on using the cluster and you switch between different namespaces, you can do it by kubectl configuration, which I'm going to show you in a minute. Right, as usual, I'm going to bring up my cluster now. Cd to play directory, git clone my GitHub repository, cd to Kubernetes, cd to Vagrant provisioning. So I'm starting from scratch. I haven't got any virtual machines. I'm going to do Vagrant up and wait for it. It's going to deploy a master node and two worker nodes, and then we'll see how to create namespaces. Namespaces are basically, you can think of it as a partition in hard disk. So you've got a cluster, you can partition your cluster by namespaces. You can create a deployment with same name, make sure that it goes into different namespaces. Within a namespace, you can't create two deployments with same name, or two pods, or any two resources with same names. But you've partitioned your cluster by namespaces, you can have deployments with the same names, but it has to be on different partitions, I mean different namespaces. So I'm going to pause the video here and come back once all the machines have been provisioned. Alright, Vagrant has provisioned us all the three virtual machines. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the Kubernetes admin configuration to .kube directory so that I can run kubectl commands from my host machine. So I'm going to make a directory, make directory .kube under my home directory. I'm going to copy from kmaster etc kubernetes admin.conf to config under my .kube directory. That's done. Okay, I'm going to start tmux session so that it's easy for us to watch in multiple panes. Let's look at the status of our cluster. kubectl cluster info. It's running. kubectl get nodes. Right, all the nodes are ready. What I'm going to do first is going to show you what namespaces we have got by default. kubectl get namespaces, or get ns for short. So we have this default namespace, and all the resources you are deploying will get deployed in the default namespace. And there's a kube system namespace which contains all the cluster related resources. If you want to see kubectl get pods, it says no resource found because you're in the default namespace and you haven't created any resource. If you look at kubectl -n kube system or -- namespace kube system get pods, you can see all these pods. So let's create a new namespace. kubectl create namespace demo. kubectl get namespace. So we have this default namespace and demo namespace, and we are in the default namespace. I'll show you how you can switch between the namespaces without having to use the -n and namespace for every single kubectl command you run. Okay, so before that, I'm going to show you what happens if you try to deploy same resource twice in the same namespace. So we are in the default namespace. Let's try to create a resource. cd to play Kubernetes, cd to YAMLs. And in my previous video, I've talked about these YAML files, pods, replica sets, and deployments. So I'm going to use the nginx pod. So I haven't mentioned any namespace here, although you can mention a namespace. I think it's under the metadata namespace, but I haven't specified a namespace yet. So when you deploy it, whatever namespace you are currently in, the resource will get created. So now we are in the default namespace. kubectl create -f nginx pod. That's created. kubectl get pods, and you can see nginx containers getting created. Let's try to do this again. kubectl create -f. You can see error from server already exists. So pod nginx already exists. So that's the namespace. Within a namespace, you can't create two resources with the same name, two pods with the same name, or two deployments, replicas. It's any resource within a namespace. You can't create a duplicate. Okay, I'll delete that resource. kubectl delete -f. That's deleted. kubectl get pods. So you don't have it. Right. What I'm going to show you now is how you can switch between the contexts. See, now you do kubectl get pods. That's the default namespace. You don't have any pods. kubectl -n kube system get pods. So you've got those pods. So without using this kube system -n for every single kubectl command, what you can do is, I'm going to show you how to create a new context. For example, kubectl config view. So that's the current configuration. That's from the .kube directory, ls, my home directory, .kube config. So that's the kube config we copied from the kmaster. So if you do kubectl config view, that's going to show you what your current configuration is. You can see the cluster definition, which cluster you're trying to connect to. The name of the cluster is Kubernetes. And how many contexts you have got? You've got one context. That context connects to the Kubernetes cluster with the user Kubernetes admin. And the name of the context is Kubernetes-admin at Kubernetes. And you've got the user. We've only got one user at the moment, Kubernetes-admin. So the other command is kubectl config get context. That shows you what context you've got in your configuration. At the moment, you've only got one configuration. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new configuration. kubectl config set context. Give it a name, the name of the context, kubesys, for example, namespace, kube system, for which user, Kubernetes admin, and the cluster name is Kubernetes. Context created. If I do kubectl config get context, you're going to see this new context. So we've got now two contexts. The first context is the default context. So when you switch into that context, you'll be using the default namespace. And I've created a new context called kubesys, and I specified the namespace to be kube system on the cluster Kubernetes. So if we switch to the kubesys context, our default namespace is going to get changed to kube system. So let's see how we can do that. kubectl config current context. If you do current context, it's going to show you what context you are in. So we are in this default context. So how to switch to the kubesys context? kubectl config use context kubesys. So switched to context kubesys. So now if I do kubectl get pods, what you'll be expecting is by this kubesys context, we are switching to the kube system namespace. So you don't have to prefix -n kube system. You don't have to specify the namespace. There you go. kubectl get pods shows you the pods in the kube system namespace. Right, let's create another context. kubectl config set context. I'm going to use the same command above, and I'm going to change the namespace to demo, and the context name is going to be demo. New context created. kubectl config get context. So I have three contexts now. The demo context. It's a long command, right? kubectl config use context demo. What you can do is you can create an alias depending on which shell you are. If you are in bash, you can create a .bash RC file, or if you're like me using Z shell, you can create a .z shell RC, zsh RC, and define an alias. I'm going to define an alias called Kubernetes current context equals kubectl config current context. I'm also going to define another alias to switch the context. Kubernetes use context, KUC. kubectl config use context. Okay, so I've defined two alias now. If I do kcc, my current context is kubesys, so I'll be using the kube system namespace. And if I do kuc demo, I'm switching to the demo namespace. If I do kubectl get pods, you won't see anything. Kuc, the default one, Kubernetes admin at Kubernetes. kubectl get pods, you don't have anything. So now let's go and do the same test again. cd to play Kubernetes YAMLs. So we'll try to deploy nginx pod.yaml to two different namespaces. So what namespace we are in? KCC current context, Kubernetes admin, kubectl get context, kubectl config get context. So we are in this context. You can see the asterisk sign, and that's the default namespace. Let's create the nginx pod. Kubectl create -f nginx pod. Pod is created. Kubectl get pods. Nginx container is getting created. If I switch the context to demo, kuc demo, and if I do current context, so I'm in the demo context. If I do kubectl get pods, you won't see anything because we are in the demo context. Let's try and run the nginx pod again on this namespace. So that got created. Previously, when we were in the default namespace, we couldn't create two nginx deployment with the same name. So now we've switched the context and switched into a different namespace. We are able to create the nginx pod. Kubectl get pods. Nginx is running. kuc Kubernetes kcc. I'm on the default namespace. Kubectl get pods. It's running. Okay. Kubectl -n demo get pods. That's running. So you can see the pod names are the same nginx, but they are running on different namespaces. Let's delete them. I'm on the default namespace. Kubectl delete pod nginx. Deleted. And I'm going to switch the namespace to demo. Kubectl delete pod nginx. It's going to get deleted. That's deleted. KUC kubesys, KCC kubesys. You can define your alias in whatever way you want. It's just convenient for you. You don't have to run the whole command. kubectl config use context kubesys or demo. So when you create an alias, you're going to save some time by not typing this long lengthy command. So right, that's it for this video. In this video I've showed you how to create a namespace and how to create a context. kubectl create namespace. So that's how you create a namespace. And if you want to view the current configuration, kubectl config view, that's the command. And if you want to see the current configuration, kubectl config current context. And if you want to create a new context, kubectl config set context, give it a name and what namespace you want to set as default for which user and for which cluster. And if you want to use a context, switch to a context, kubectl config use context and the context name. And you can define the alias. So I've got the KUC and KCC, alias KCC, alias KUC. So basically KCC is the command for kubectl config current context that's going to show you what context you are in. kubectl config use context is going to switch the current configuration to the configuration you specify. Okay, cool. That's it I wanted to show in this video, and I hope you learned something new in the Kubernetes series. And if you've got any questions about context namespaces, drop me a comment and I should be able to respond to you. And thanks for watching. Thanks for your time. I will see you in my next video. Bye bye.